authority. So that's okay. So this is the sort of, for anyone who might not, maybe you haven't been to Vancouver, these are our sort of our buses, our sea buses, our SkyTrain, and there's 8,000 employees. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion with Manpreet and Lorie. Hand it over to you, Lorie.
Hey, hi everybody. So happy to be here. So thanks so much, Manpreet and Steph. As you were sharing how we have each other as support, I'm grateful for the two of you, because I do call you when I am feeling that it's really hard, and you're always there. And I am so grateful for our community. So my name is Lorie Corcuera. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm calling from Vancouver. So I'm calling from the unceded, traditional, and ancestral Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. I am personally committed to unlearning and learning more about the history. I have so much to learn, but I am very, very grateful to be a settler here in Canada. I'm currently the People and Belonging Director at Timbre Games. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, because we've only been around for 2 years, it is a startup video gaming company. We haven't said what game we're making yet, because it's top secret, but we are part of the Sumo Digital Group, which is based out of the UK, and we have 18 studios, about 1,600 people globally. I handle Timbre Games as well as Adam Hawk Canada in Vancouver. And I just want to share that there's a lot of people on this call that I'm so excited to learn from, because I always feel uncomfortable when people say, expert, the word expert, because I am a lifelong learner. Instead, I like to say that I am someone who's very, very passionate about bringing more love and joy in the world. And that's what gets me up in the morning. So this is what my intention is as I do EDI work or work in an HR role within companies. It's all about that. So I'm excited for this conversation. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. And so where this call came from was a sense of like, all of us have different perspectives on what's happening in EDI. For myself, with Veza, we work with a lot of government agencies, but also we're doing some work in international spaces, and we're consultancy. So we were seeing a very different lens. In talking to Stephanie and Lorie, they were seeing different lens as well. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask was, both of you, was like, what is your sense of what's happening right now? We see a lot of things happening in the news. The affirmative action in the States, Dutch government kind of collapsed because of the refugee crisis here. Other things have happening around the world as well. What is your sense of what's happening, and what are some of the successes you've seen and the progress that you've seen? And also, what are the sense like you're like, oh, this could be better? Very loaded question, but it's a start off.
You start, Lorie.
Oh my goodness, you're gonna start the big question. Okay, yeah. So we did talk a little bit about this, because we wanted to just have like a pre-conversation, like what is it that we want to share and where we at with all of that's going on. And if I remember correctly, what we see in the news is what we see, right? Like it's hard to tell what's really happening. Obviously, the affirmative action and Roe versus Wade, all of those things are real. Like it's happening in the US, and that's part of the news. So that part is very sad and disappointing, since everything has started, because I know some of that started a few years ago, and I don't really understand why the US or certain governments seem like they're going backwards. The only thing I can think of is that to make sense of the world is that there's a lot of fear in the world. And I keep thinking, okay, the reason why this is happening is just, I don't know, old thinking, control, power, dynamics, all of the things that we know that we're trying to challenge the status quo, the systems and the structures and all of that. So in general, I'm disappointed. I try to focus on what I can control within my organization, within the communities. Every day, I just, for myself, starting with myself, continue to do the work of being more self-aware, because I feel people lead in fear or have these, I feel like saying selfish ways of doing things, because they're just not as enlightened. They haven't done the work to realize that it's not good, and the right thing to do is to do what's best for the collective, for the good of humanity. But yeah, I think for me, I see what's happening, and then I try to I called these two and say, okay, my goodness, did you see this article? Did you see what's happening? And how to, have a conversation about it. It does start a conversation, and then figure out, okay, what can we do within, within the organizations or within, our communities, and then from there. And part of this is what we're doing right now. Like, we probably don't have all the answers, but let's talk about it and see what support you actually need and how can we get through this together. So not sure if I answered the question, but I'm going to pass it on to Steph now.
No, that's a perfect answer.
Yeah. So for me, I bring the perspective of, I get paid to do equity, diversity, and inclusion work, based in Canada. I've been doing this work for a while. And there's a few things that I kind of see, as, Manpreet and Lorie were talking about affirmative action. I feel like there's a few things I want to discuss around, like, affirmative action, banning of books, and then talk about sort of success around legislation. So one of the interesting pieces around the affirmative action, right, being removed from universities in the US universities, in Canada still, and I don't want to, I'm going to share some good things that I think we're doing in Canada, but by no means do I think it's like, oh my goodness, pat ourselves on the back, give us the green star or the gold star and we're good. But I was reading this article from the National Post talking about how Dalhousie, actually, their nursing program reserves seats for Indigenous and Black students. So that was really good to see. And also, like, the University of Calgary in their law school, they have sort of an alternative path for Black students. So again, in Canada, we still have that, which is great to see, because I do think the ripple effect of university students, there will be a huge ripple effect. And I think it'll put the pressure on companies to sort of step up, right? And I think it comes down to the, in this work, it's the access to opportunities, right? It's the privilege and the power that sort of holds onto privilege and power. And Lorie, you talk about that fear, right? And it feels like, I'm a baker, so we can talk about the pie. It's like you're losing a piece of pie, or you're losing cookies, right? And that is not the case. The banning books piece is really interesting because, in the US, we've seen where books are being banned, which, again, that ripple effect of who's telling the story in the narrative. And then actually in Canada, which is interesting, and I will say actually just in BC, so my daughter, who's in grade 12, in order to graduate now in BC, you have to take an Indigenous course to graduate. So this is one of those interesting steps where it's like, in Canada, our history of residential schools and the genocide around Indigenous people, we are learning and hearing more, and Indigenous authors are writing books. And so this is kind of Canada's truth. And then, when you're asking about sort of the success and the progress, when we talk about legislation, there's legislation around accessibility. So for people with disabilities and organizations, and really putting that legislation in. What's fascinating is that didn't really come in, the Accessible Canada Act came in 2019, whereas in America, it's been the Americas with Disabilities Act has been around for 33 years, which is fascinating because I think we also sometimes think, well, in Canada, it's not that bad, right? And so this is an example of where we've been relying on just goodwill to get things done. And then the last piece I will share is I'm very excited to see around pay transparency legislation that's coming into play, where you need to share your certain companies this year, and then probably by, I think, the end, like November 2024, you have to share your salary ranges. You have to do an audit based on gender. And then share that report. So I really do think that that will be a bit of a game changer as we sort of go forward, which, of course, for me, being a bit of sometimes sarcastic, why do we not share salary ranges anyways? Does anybody take a job without knowing what the salary is? I'm curious. Maybe somebody has taken a job without knowing what the salary is, but I'm pretty sure you probably didn't. Maybe.
Yeah, I think, and Stephanie, that the salary ranges, when I bring this up, they're like, but some certain industries, especially government, they've always done pay transparency. So I feel like it's just the industries that we're in that we're seeing as a new thing. Some companies have actually been doing it for quite a while.
Well, because the thing is,
Yeah.
I mean, I worked at UBC for years, so I
Mm,
was used to pay grades my entire career because you were in government.
yeah.
And so it's always been interesting for me from that perspective, but it's I mean, I think it's very valid. One of the things though you were saying, because when we have some people from England here, one of the things that I love about what England is doing at the legislation they passed, which I always like to promote, for small businesses, they had to be paid within 30 days. Because otherwise, small businesses are usually equity
Mm,
deserving groups,
mhm.
and they cannot survive. So 90% of their invoice or like the payment has to be made within 30 days, and only 10% can be held back, which I think
Seems
is
like great.
amazing. And I think that
Yeah.
England is doing such a great job with that. And then also we know that there's a lot of, you know, looking at racism in healthcare, because this is one of the questions that kind of came in. There's a lot of work that's being done for international doctors and residents, and then also just how the healthcare systems are. There's some really, really great work being done around that around the world too. So I agree. Like I think that the narrative and the way that where we focus in media, I'm guilty of it because I end up going down a rabbit hole and I see, and I
Mhm.
feel like the logarithm is so negative at the time that I'm
Yeah.
sucks. But
That's right. You do end up feeling you've either missed out on a very good party that everybody went to,
yeah,
and legislation is tough. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So with that, with all of this in mind, what are some of the things like the tips or the suggestions and recommendations you have for the professionals on the call today and what they can do in the current climate? How can they take care of their resiliency, but then also and own their own, like, you know, themselves? But what is the work that they can do to continue to advocate? We do know that budgets are being cut. Like as a consultant, we're seeing budgets being cut, projects are being pushed. But also the other hand, there's still RFPs coming out, and those things are still happening. And the numbers are changing for a lot of consultants as well, in terms of like what budgets are available. So what do you like? And we have a bunch of consultants and we have a bunch of people who here are internal as well. So what are your suggestions and recommendations for people to take care of themselves? And then also just for in terms of the work that they do. Before we're going to go into breakout rooms right after this and just preparing some people to make sure that you do the breakout with the cameras on if possible. Otherwise you can do them cameras off if you're just let your group know.
I don't know if this is what people are going to want to hear or if this is something that I should share, but I'm just going to be fully transparent and honest. So I was in another organization before joining Timbre, and you know, sometimes you go into environments and you hope that the leadership, especially at the very top, is supportive and they get it. And in that environment, it was very clear to me, even after they created a role around EDI, that it was performative. And so for me, I had to really check in. I could have just stayed, right? I got promoted, I got the salary, I got a bit of a budget, but something just didn't feel real and authentic or genuine. Like I felt like we were just doing it because like everyone else was doing it, but they weren't doing it for the right reasons. And I never really heard from the leadership. So, you know, I want to say to all of you, like, hang in there and just like, you know, stick with your values and take care of yourself and do what you can within that environment. And maybe that is what you might have to do if you need to, you know, if you need the job or whatever. But I think for me, I couldn't get up every morning and it was draining me. So I had to make a decision to find a place where I felt like the leadership really understood and was aligned with it and got it. And that's what I found at Timbre and as well as Sumo. Like they have doubled down on their investment, even though everything is going, you know, whatever's going on in the world, they just wanted to make sure that this was something that they would absolutely, you know, want to continue to focus, because it's about the people and about, you know, ensuring that we're creating that best experience for everyone. So I think I don't want to say just like take off and leave, but at the same time, I think just check in with your values, your purpose, really get clear about, what's important for you. And then if you feel like there is still an opportunity to do that work within the organization and within the budget that you have, then yeah, by all means, continue to do that. But if you get to a place where you really feel it's not the environment that's ready for it, because maybe they're just not ready, they're not aware, then, find the place or find places or communities that are ready for that, or that could at least support you to get through that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'll add on, if you're inside, and even as a consultant, I would say, you continue to sort of show up and show value, right? That that you're doing good work. I would say on the inside too, who knows what you're doing? Because one of the things that I sort of struggle with is, me and another colleague, we're doing a lot of things, but how is it communicated out? And how do you make sure to embed yourself into town halls, team meetings, in newsletters, to make sure that you're getting this information, that you're doing all of this great work? So that's one. I would say continue to educate yourself for sure, because things, I find, I've been doing this full time since 2015, and I think things are more complex and nuanced, but also very simple in a way, because a lot of the things that you get into the discussion seem quite complex. But then when you start to break it down to the basics, it comes down to the basics around how do the people in your organization with the most barriers feel supported? Are they supported or not? Are you removing those barriers, right? And what are you doing to remove those? And then also, this is a fascinating thing that I listened to a session yesterday from a woman who, she does EDI, as a fractional sort of chief diversity and inclusion officer. And she's like, why do you always give 150%? Why? Why is in this field we need to kind of become emotionally drained because of this space and give 150%? Somehow, I don't know if maybe, and I feel like I've bought into this myth about like coming home and stressing about it and talking to everybody. And it's like, sometimes you need to kind of take a step back and be like, I'm getting paid to do a particular thing, and not at the cost of me burning out. Because if I burn out, it does no good for the organization.
Yeah. And
Right?
like I'll say that, like even yesterday, a friend was like, oh, I needed to discuss this. I wanted to see if this was like about colonialism or patriarchy. I'm like, yeah, I'm not on the clock. I'm sorry. I'm not like, this is like, I do this as work, and it ends up bleeding into my entire life, and so many social circles, so many social events. I can't continue having one-to-one conversations like all the time. And I'm like, not that I'm not passionate about the topic, but I also can't help you process what you're going through. Like there's avenues to help you process that. And I actually invited her to the Veza Slack group, and so we'll see if she joins to continue these conversations, because there's spaces for this, right? And we need to take care of that. We do have a quick question here before we're going to go into breakouts. What is the future of DEI given the changes in the corporate environment beyond ERGs? So I'm just going to type in first as you two think. There's a really great article that was published by Forbes India, where they were talking about inclusion 2.0 being inclusive product and service design. And I actually loved it. So I would suggest if you want to go read that article, I think it was actually really great about where things are going. I think, and for me personally, I'm like a big fan of like how it fits into the ESG model. And the environmental social governance. Going through the ES, like if you're going actually read up on ESGs and looking at the metrics and everything else, the measurements are there. Companies are being told that they have to measure on ESGs. And it's another framework for them to be kind of grounded in the fact that this is fundamental work that needs to be done. And it needs to be done at such a critical level along with sustainability for an organization, regardless of the size of the organization. That's why when we look at B Corp organizations, they put all the diversity questions are measured as well. So these are the kind of measurements that are already in place. Like I think this work is actually going to go beyond. I actually never thought it should be in HR anyways. I'm an HR professional as well. I don't actually think it should be in HR. I think it should be actually embedded within the organization as a central project office, that everything kind of gets looked at through this lens, along with sustainability and indigenous relations. So that's my little soapbox around that. But Stephanie, Lorie?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that because, do you want to say something, Steph?
I'll say it after. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was looking into the ESG as well when I was in my previous role. And but then I saw wasn't there some anti ESG through the US government? Like they were like now. So I'm like, I'm so confused. Like we said we wanted it. We said the business roundtable that we want companies to be purpose driven. Like there's always just these two different sides. So I mean, for me, I'm always, if you notice now already that I speak from like a leading self perspective, because I'm always thinking, okay, what can I control in this situation? Otherwise, if I feel like I have to save the whole world, I probably wouldn't be able to get up in the morning because it would be just so heavy. So, filling our cups and just really taking care of ourselves. And when I'm able to then show up for everybody else, it's just focusing on whatever I can control. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question around the ESG, but for me, I think that within our organization and the people that I'm working with, we're just going to continue to do the work regardless of what's happening in the world. We know what we want to do and what is important to us as an organization, and we're just sticking to that plan.
Yeah, awesome. Stephanie?
Yeah, I would agree I sort of see the ESGs. I think, for the employee resource groups, though, I think there is a place in the organization for it. It's kind of like similar to education. We need education, but the expectations around education and employee resource groups need to be, explicit, right? Because I think sometimes when we do this work, if we just have a women's ERG, we are made, set, check, women in leadership, done, right? And it really comes down to as I'll just call it, the non-sexy things such as processes and practices, like getting really deep into that to figure out why do we have a diverse group of employees that enter our organization, and where do they go at the director, VP, and C-suite level? Yeah. We all know where they go. I don't need another HBR article to tell me, right? So that's where I feel like we need the ERGs, but then because that sort of creates that sort of opportunity to sort of push the organization, but it really is the systems and the processes that you have to be looking through.
Oh, completely. You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because I want to make sure that everyone connects. Thank you, both of you lovely ladies, because I think, it's so many little nuggets in there that my mind's like, again, I'm like thinking about these things about focusing on the positive in the media, focusing on creating love and connection, staying in your lane kind of like, and being like, we got to get the work done. Super important pieces. But I want to make sure that everyone gets out to breakout rooms. So I'm going to open the breakouts. While you're in the breakout, one of the questions you might want to, after you introduce yourself, you might want to talk about is, how do you engage others in the hard topics, and what strategies have you used and what has worked? So if you want to discuss the question, that's great. But again, I'll put it in the broadcast so you can get it again. But I'm going to just pop you into a group. And for those who don't want to be in a group, feel free to leave at this point as well, because I know there's a few of you that don't want to do a breakout. Okay, so I'm going to pop you in. Please say yes when you can. Oops.
Maybe I'll join for a few minutes, actually. I'll go in too.
I think everyone's going here.